The African National Congress and the economic freedom fighters have called for full state ownership of the South African Reserve Bank. But yesterday, the Free Market Foundation said that the institution was a statutory creation of Parliament, which also determined the main policy goals that the bank was tasked to fulfill. For more on this, let's chat now to the Foundation's Executive Director, Mr. Leon Lowe. Leon, thank you for joining me this evening and welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you and the viewers.
It is said that the South African Reserve Bank is an anomaly, and in a sense it is, in that it's privately owned. It's one of only, about 9 reserve banks worldwide that are privately owned. Why is private ownership important?
Well, firstly, this is not an anomaly. This is a meme, a myth. The Reserve Bank is not privately owned. It's created in the Constitution, provided for, which is reinforced by the Reserve Bank Act. It has something, I forget the exact number, 15 directors. A small minority of the directors are appointed by the private shareholders, who are a minority. It's state-owned. The president appoints all the governors. Everything in the Reserve Bank is government-owned, and it's directed by the Constitution to maintain or protect the value of the currency. That's its job. Yeah. And this idea that it's private is nonsense. It's simply a factual error and a lie. And it's got a political motive, and the political motive is very clear. We need to understand what it is. It is the belief that the Reserve Bank should not do what the Constitution says it must do, which is to protect the value of the currency, but that it should inflate the currency, that it should cause inflation, that it should print money in advance of an election, and it should play around with monetary policy, and in other words, that it should perform the functions of other government departments like the Treasury. So it is wrong. It is entirely politically controlled. It is controlled specifically by the president. It is the president's creature, the president's baby, and implements the president's policy. So this myth is, in fact, I'm sorry to have to say this, but it's a lie. People who say that are simply, they know they are lying. It's not as if they can be excused for the error. They know exactly what they're saying, and they're saying it to be purposefully and deliberately dishonest.
But the fact does remain, though, that actual ownership of the shares in the Reserve Bank lies in the hands of private individuals, doesn't it?
No, it lies in the state. The private individuals have a minority of shares. They have no voting power. They have no control whatsoever. The majority of shares are owned by the state, but more importantly, even if they weren't, all the control is in the hands of the state. So everything the Reserve Bank does or doesn't do that someone doesn't like, they cannot blame the private shareholders because they have no say in the matter whatsoever. They're a small minority. It is entirely the decision, the political decision of the appointees. But this must be clear. The governors of the Reserve Bank and the board of the Reserve Bank and every staff member, every person working for the Reserve Bank is directed by the Constitution and the Act to act autonomously and to perform one function and one function only, which is to protect the value of the rand. And they must do that without fear or favor, as the Act says, and that is what they do. And what people want to do is remove their autonomy. It's actually got nothing to do with private shareholding whatsoever. That is a myth, and as I say, a dishonest one, because the people who say that, and I'm not attributing this to you, I don't expect you as a person in the media, that's why you have people like me on the program, to come along and say, actually, that lie that is being told out there is a lie. It is government-controlled, majority government-owned, and the nationalisation of the minority private shares will make no difference at all to how it operates. Zero difference. The only thing that will make a difference is if the president appoints politically appointed people who go in there and do not perform its constitutional function. If they go there and they do not protect the value of the rand, if instead, for example, they inflate the rand in anticipation of an election to create the illusion of prosperity and growth, that is what the people behind this rhetoric, this dishonest rhetoric, actually have in mind. They want the government, the Reserve Bank, to behave as a branch of politics, not as a provider of stable currency to a democracy.
But if the private shareholders have so little influence anyway, what difference will it make if there are no private shareholders?
None at all. None at all. It will have zero difference. If the Reserve Bank violates its constitutional and its statutory mandate now, it is possible that some of the private shareholders will make some public statement saying that it's not fulfilling its mandate. But they would say that anyway. If 100% of the shares were owned by the government and the Reserve Bank stops fulfilling its constitutional obligations and its statutory obligations, then people like me and you and everyone else will say the Reserve Bank is violating its constitutional obligations. The people behind this, that's what they want it to do. They want to remove its autonomy, they want to remove its constitutional function, they want to remove the statutory obligations it has to perform.
But if the intention is to manipulate the Reserve Bank in the manner that you suggest, surely the way to do it is not to even worry about the minority shareholders, as you put it, but rather to go directly to amending the Reserve Bank Act and amending the Constitution itself. I would imagine that there's enough voices that would support the amendment of the Constitution in a similar way that there probably are, with respect to expropriation of land without compensation.
Yes, obviously. If they nationalise the minority of private shareholders and then they find 6 months or a year later it has made no difference whatsoever, which will be the case, then they will wake up and they will say, oh dear, what we should have done was amend the Reserve Bank Act and amend the Constitution. And you're right, the two parties concerned do have enough of the vote in Parliament to do that, and that's what they will have to do. Because taking over, if there were no private shareholders, whatever, it would be completely irrelevant.
But are you absolutely certain? I mean, you seem convinced that that's the intention, that they want to be able to manipulate the Reserve Bank in such a way that they can, make favorable decisions for themselves, for instance, at election time, as you put it earlier, to print money when they want to.
Yes, let's understand that this is the ANC which wrote the provisions in the Constitution. So we must understand the Reserve Bank Act and the Constitution are the ANC's policy.
Right.
The ANC is mere making a political judgment. It thinks if it moves to the left and satisfies or aligns with the EFF, which has accused the Reserve Bank of being what it calls conservative. In other words, conserving the value of the rand. Then the ANC is now saying that in order to maybe to anticipate some alliance with the EFF or to try and get back its members who went to the EFF, so it's sort of doing this funny shuffle to the left in the hope that somehow it'll appease some voters somewhere or some unions, but it'll have no consequence whatsoever. And the only statement that has been made as to why anyone would want to do this is to stop the conservative policy of the Reserve Bank. In other words, to stop the Reserve Bank doing what it's meant to do, which is to have conservative monetary policy. That's another way of saying preserving the value of the currency. Now, let's understand that if you erode the value of the currency, as Germany has done, as Hungary has done, as Yugoslavia has done historically, Venezuela, Argentina, of course, the famous example north of us, Zimbabwe. Many countries have gone this route. They've caused absolute economic devastation, massive unemployment, massive poverty, hyperinflation, and essentially destroyed their economies. And that's what is apparently behind this desire. And there's some total confusion as to the idea that the Reserve Bank is private. It is not. It has never been. Currency used to be issued by private banks in South Africa until the Reserve Bank was created. And ever since then, money in South Africa has been a government function, totally government, total government appointment, total government control. But under the Reserve Bank Act, which says, like with the courts, the judiciary, or like with the Auditor General, here you are the Auditor General, you are the Hawks, you're the prosecuting authority, you're the judiciary, and you're the Reserve Bank, and you are autonomous. And your autonomous job is the following. In this case, preserve the value of the currency.
Yeah.
And that is what they have to do. And if anyone in the Reserve Bank doesn't do that, whether they're private or government, is completely irrelevant. They will be violating the law. They will be acting illegally, and they will have compromised their autonomy, which is guaranteed by the Constitution and the Act. So this is actually, I'm afraid to say, a very strange political populist move, but unlike others like minimum wage or expropriation without compensation, it can have no consequence. You see, you can implement expropriation without compensation or minimum wage or something, and it will have effects. But this will have no effect whatsoever. If you abolish the private shareholding, all that will happen is the private shareholders will get slightly less dividends. It will affect their profit line slightly. And the government gets exactly the same dividend, and it's the majority.
Which is in March. I mean, the dividend is like, what,
It's
10 cents per share or something? I mean,
it's negligible.
On 2 million shares.
So that's not the issue. The issue is not the dividend. I'm just mentioning that'll be a consequence. The real issue here is whether you want to play fast and loose politically with the currency, and no responsible or sensible person should want to do that.
Is there any reason at all that you would imagine that would justify, that would warrant even contemplating such a move as in towards nationalization?
Yes, the belief that the political parties cannot use the Reserve Bank as a political tool, that's what the problem is. It's like the courts. It's like saying we want to remove the independence of the courts. We want to turn the courts, as they are in some countries, into an arm of the ruling political party. Politicize the judgments that they must make. You know, the United States, a famous democracy, we're now seeing the debate about whether Donald Trump is going to appoint a right-wing conservative judge. In America, the judiciary, at least at the highest level, is politicized. Even at the lowest level, judges are voted on. It's a political issue. Now, in South Africa, we have a democracy with an independent judiciary. A few countries like Russia and North Korea and the United States, strangely enough, have a politicized judiciary and a politicized Reserve Bank. We in South Africa have a democracy with autonomous important agencies, independent Reserve Bank, independent judiciary, independent prosecuting authority, independent Auditor General, and so on, our Chapter 9 organizations. That is what a democracy is, and that is what any respectable person who wants to see this country having a sustainable long-term future should want to see. Anyone who wants to remove the independence of the Reserve Bank is like somebody saying, I want to remove the independence of the judiciary, I want to turn it into a party political activity. That is what's behind this. And that is good for anyone who supports the party that has that power. But bearing in mind, privatizing these shares or making it more political, or eventually they will have to amend the Act and the Constitution. Once they've done that, like expropriation without compensation, bearing in mind it far outlives the current politicians by generations. So you're not making a decision about what's going to happen under this president or next year or the following year. You're making a decision about what's going to happen under political parties you might hate, under politicians you might hate. This is long-term playing with the country because of short-term expedient objectives.
Thank you very much, Leon, and thanks for joining us. Our reporter, Natasha Peary, spoke earlier to the African National Congress Secretary General Ace Magashule. Here's what he had to say about the nationalization of the Reserve Bank.
We have taken a decision to nationalize the Reserve Bank. We are not shy about it. It is not just going to be implemented within a year, but modalities, work. I know work has already started. Even the president is very vocal on the nationalization of the Reserve Bank because it's an ANC resolution, just like the withdrawing from the ICC. It's an ANC resolution. It can't be changed by any comrade in government. So our deployees were very happy and satisfied that they clearly understand. So we are how many months from Nasrec? 5-6 months. So you can't nationalize the Reserve Bank in 6 months, in a year. You have to work and ensure that come the next conference of the ANC, I can assure you, we shall have implemented conference resolutions.
What do you make of that?
I know Mr. Magashule, and I know that he's not a person schooled in banking, and he has been misinformed, I'm afraid. I have the highest regard for him, I have respect for him. He's promoted and worked with me personally and with my organization on promoting land titling policies, for example, in the Free State, when he was the Premier of the Free State. And I'm afraid he has been given very bad advice, and I'm sorry to say dishonest advice. Whoever gave him that information actually told him a deliberate, calculated, and malicious lie.
Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this topic a hell of a lot more in future.
It'll be my pleasure.
Thank you very much. That's all we have time for this evening. Tune in to Prime Business at 8 o'clock on Monday. Have a good weekend.